She was found in the desert. No name, no ID, no clues. Just the silent remains of a woman who had once lived a full life somewhere far from here. For more than 3 decades, she was known only as Jane Doe, another entry in a case file marked unsolved. But in 2015, a single photograph, discovered in an old police folder, would finally expose her name, her story, and the truth that had been hidden beneath layers of time and sand. Her name was Brenda Gerow, and her journey from a quiet New Hampshire town to a desert grave in Arizona would become one of the most haunting cold cases of the 1980s. To understand what happened to Brenda, we need to go back. Before the mystery, before the headlines, to Nashua, New Hampshire in 1980. A small mill town tucked between the Merrimack River and the Massachusetts border. A town where everyone seemed to know everyone else, and where a young woman with a gentle smile and an artist's heart dreamed of seeing more of the world. Brenda Marie Gerow was 20 years old, independent, gentle, and eager for something new. She worked at a small photo shop downtown and spent her evenings sketching by the river. Her friends described her as loyal but restless. She talked often about wanting to travel, to see the Southwest, the open desert, the freedom of the road. And that's where she met him, John Jack Calhauser, older, charming, persuasive. No one could have imagined that the man she trusted would soon become the center of one of New Hampshire's most enduring mysteries. By the end of the summer of 1980, Nashua was settling into its usual rhythm. Mornings brought the hum of traffic on Main Street, and the scent of fresh bread from the corner bakery drifted through the air. Brenda Gerow was last seen walking along those same streets, a small bag over her shoulder, a quiet smile, and the promise of something new waiting out west. She told friends she was leaving New Hampshire with her boyfriend, John Calhauser. Jack, as most people called him, was older, nearly 10 years Brenda's senior. To some, he came across as confident, to others, controlling. He had met Brenda at a local gathering, and within weeks, their relationship moved quickly. Too quickly, according to her friends. Jack Calhauser had a complicated past, one that Brenda knew little about. Before coming to Nashua, he had a criminal record that included burglary and assault. He was also known to travel frequently, drifting from one state to another, often leaving behind more questions than answers. He could be charming in public, but in private, people said his temper could turn quickly. In hindsight, those who knew Brenda say there were warning signs. Small moments when she seemed uneasy, quieter than usual. But she never spoke openly about it. She was young, trusting, and in love with the idea of something better. In late summer, Brenda told her family she and Jack were heading to Arizona. She promised she would call once they arrived, maybe even send pictures of the desert, something she'd always wanted to see. She never called. Weeks passed. Her brother, Steve, grew concerned. Letters went unanswered. Phone calls rang into silence. By October, the family filed a missing person report with Nashua police. But at that time, cross-state communication was slow. There was no national database for missing adults, and many departments still kept handwritten records stored in metal cabinets. When detectives started looking into her disappearance, they quickly realized how little they knew. Jack Calhauser was already gone. According to one neighbor, they had packed their car in a hurry late at night and driven away before dawn. No one saw Brenda after that. The police traced Calhauser's trail to Tucson, Arizona, but by then, months had passed, and without any evidence of a crime, the investigation stalled. To law enforcement, it was a missing person case, one among hundreds. To her family, it was an open wound. In the following months, Brenda's family called every week for updates. Each time, the answer was the same. We're still looking. Leads were scarce, and resources were limited. Detectives circulated her photo locally, but in the pre-digital age, there was no way to share information easily across state lines, and so the case began to fade from the headlines. In Nashua, life moved on, and the seasons changed, streets filled with holiday lights. But inside one quiet house, her parents kept her room exactly as she'd left it. Meanwhile, in Arizona, something else was about to unfold. On a warm morning in April 1981, roughly 8 months after Brenda left New Hampshire, 2 hunters hiking near Interstate 10 came across something they would never forget. Partially hidden beneath brush and stones, the skeletal remains of a woman lay exposed to the elements. There were no clothes, no purse, no identification. Investigators could only estimate her age, early 20s, maybe younger. They called her the Pima County Jane Doe. For the next 34 years, that name would be the only identity she had. The discovery site was remote, a stretch of desert about 20 miles northwest of Tucson, Arizona. It was April 8th, 1981. 2 hunters had been following a dry river wash when they noticed what looked like a pale, curved stone in the sand. It wasn't a stone. When they looked closer, they saw the unmistakable outline of a human skull. Within hours, Pima County deputies arrived at the scene. The air was still, the landscape silent except for the low hum of desert insects. The remains lay partially buried. Bones sun-bleached, fragile, scattered slightly by weather and wildlife. There were no clothes, no jewelry, and no form of identification. Detectives on scene noted that the woman appeared to have been dead for several months, possibly as long as a year. The coroner's examination revealed no clear cause of death. There were no visible bullet wounds, no signs of blunt force trauma. However, investigators believed foul play was likely. The body had been deliberately concealed, covered with brush and rocks, not the way nature leaves its dead. With so little evidence, she was entered into the system simply as Jane Doe, case number 81-0408. Forensic technology in 1981 was limited. DNA analysis didn't yet exist in any practical form, and national databases were decades away. What investigators did have were basic tools: fingerprints, dental impressions, and above all, persistence. The coroner noted the victim was a Caucasian female, approximately 20 years old, 5'4", slender build. Her hair, light brown, teeth well cared for, no fillings, which was unusual for the time. She could have come from anywhere, and that was the problem. Throughout the early 1980s, Pima County investigators circulated her information to agencies nationwide. They compared dental records against hundreds of missing persons, women who had disappeared from California, Nevada, New Mexico, even as far away as Maine. But each lead ended the same way: no match. In the absence of progress, the case grew cold. By 1985, her file was moved to the inactive shelf, alongside dozens of others. Silent stories waiting for technology to catch up. But time has a way of circling back. In the late 1990s, advances in forensic science began to reopen old cases. Among them, the Pima County Jane Doe. In 1999, the remains were re-examined by a newer generation of forensic analysts. DNA extraction had become possible, and investigators hoped to finally link the remains to a missing person. A sample was taken, processed, and stored in the newly created National Database, CODIS, the combined DNA index system. Still, no match came back. But time has a way of circling back. In the late 1990s, advances in forensic science began to reopen old cases. Among them, the Pima County Jane Doe. In 1999, the remains were re-examined by a newer generation of forensic analysts. DNA extraction had become possible, and investigators hoped to finally link the remains to a missing person. A sample was taken, processed, and stored in the newly created national database, CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System. Still, no match came back. One detective, however, couldn't let it go. Detective Paul Hebert of the Pima County Sheriff's Department joined the force in the mid-90s. He was known for revisiting cold cases during off hours, quietly, methodically. He described the Jane Doe case as different. "It bothered me," he said years later. "Someone cared about her. Someone missed her." He began reaching out to other departments, looking for any woman reported missing around 1980 to 81 who might fit the description. Among the files that crossed his desk was an old report from Nashua, New Hampshire. A young woman, age 20, missing since 1980. Her name, Brenda Gerow. The report was thin. A single photograph, a few notes about her leaving town with an older man. The detective compared her stats against the Jane Doe profile. 5'4", light brown hair, slender, similar dental structure. The resemblance was undeniable, but resemblance wasn't proof. Without DNA from Brenda's family, he couldn't confirm it. Years passed again. Brenda's case, like so many others, hovered in limbo, caught between possibility and proof. Then, in 2014, a breakthrough finally came. A new detective unit reopened the cold case archives, this time using advanced DNA sequencing. When they revisited the Pima County Jane Doe's DNA profile, they found something new. A partial familial match in a growing national genealogy database. That match led them straight to New Hampshire. In early 2014, Detective Hebert received an alert from the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NamUs. A new cross-check between forensic and genealogical databases had produced a potential link between the Pima County Jane Doe and a family living in Nashua, New Hampshire. The name on the file stopped him cold. Gerow. He'd seen it before, decades earlier, scribbled in faded ink on an old missing person report. After 34 years, the case had come full circle. In March 2015, after DNA from Brenda's brother confirmed the match, investigators made it official. The woman known for decades as Pima County Jane Doe was Brenda Marie Gerow, missing from Nashua since 1980. The announcement traveled quickly. Local newspapers in New Hampshire published the story under the headline, "Cold Case Solved. Nashua Woman Found After 34 Years." For her family, it was a bittersweet moment. An answer they had long stopped expecting and a grief reignited after decades of silence. But while one mystery had been solved, another remained. Who had taken Brenda's life? And why had she ended up in a desert hundreds of miles from home? Investigators already had a name in mind, a man who had once promised to take her there, John Jack Kalhauser. At the time of Brenda's disappearance, Kalhauser was a 30-year-old drifter with a violent history. He had been known to change names, use false identities, and cross state lines to evade warrants. What detectives found next revealed a pattern of abuse, deception, and escape that stretched back years. Records showed that in 1979, Kalhauser had been charged with assaulting a previous girlfriend in Massachusetts. The charges were dropped after she refused to testify, reportedly out of fear. In 1980, he resurfaced in Nashua, where he met Brenda. Neighbors remembered the couple often arguing. One recalled hearing shouting late at night, followed by the sound of a car door slamming. Not long after, both were gone. Once investigators confirmed Brenda's identity, they turned their attention to Cal Hauser's whereabouts. He was still alive, living quietly in Arizona under an assumed name. When detectives arrived at his address in 2015, the man who answered the door was gray-haired, calm, and surprisingly composed. After more than 3 decades, his past had finally caught up with him. He was arrested on outstanding charges related to a separate homicide. But detectives believed he was also connected to Brenda's death. Although Cal Hauser was never formally charged with Brenda's murder before his death, investigators remain convinced he was responsible. Evidence placed both of them in Arizona during the time frame of her death. Cal Hauser's criminal record, his pattern of violence, and the timing of his disappearance from New Hampshire all pointed in one direction. For the detectives who spent years chasing shadows, the identification of Brenda and the exposure of Cal Hauser's hidden life felt like long-awaited closure. After her identification, Brenda's remains were returned to her family in New Hampshire. A small memorial service was held near the Merrimack River, not far from where she once spent evenings sketching by the water. Her family placed her photo beside a candle and a single desert stone brought from Arizona. For them, the case had never been about revenge, only the truth. Detective Heber kept a copy of her case file in his office long after it was closed. On the front, in bold black letters, he wrote 2 words: identified, remembered. For him, and for many who worked on the case, Brenda Gerow was not just another statistic. She was proof that persistence matters, that technology can revive justice even after decades of silence, and that every name deserves to be found again. For 34 years, Brenda Gerow's story existed only in fragments: a missing person file in New Hampshire and an unidentified body in Arizona. 2 separate stories, 2 different worlds, connected only by silence. It took decades of science, persistence, and a handful of people who refused to give up to bring those stories together. But even as one mystery was solved, thousands of others remain. Across the United States, there are more than 13,000 unidentified remains. Men and women whose stories have never been told. Behind each case file is a family still waiting for a call, still leaving a light on in a window, still hoping that somewhere, someone remembers. Brenda's case reminds us that identity is more than a name. It's a promise that someone's life mattered. When detectives identified her in 2015, they didn't just close a file. They reopened a chapter of humanity that had been paused for 3 decades. Forensic technology gave her a name. Compassion gave her a story. What do you think happened to Brenda in those final days? Do you believe Cal Hauser acted alone? Or was there more to the story we still don't know? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to see more stories like this, stories that deserve to be told, please consider subscribing. Because every case, no matter how cold, carries a truth waiting to be found.